Did you know that the Hanseatic League once went to war with the Kingdom of Denmark and won? Absolutely true. Between 1361 and 1370, the Hanseatic League took exception to King Valdemar IV of Denmark trying to prevent them from trading into Scandinavia and making Scandinavian towns part of their trading network, and they had a war with him. They forced him to sign a treaty called the Treaty of Stralsund in 1370, which gave them 15% of all traded profits within Scandinavia and allowed them to further establish their monopolistic trade practices in Northern Europe. Merchant guilds are what I want to talk about today. How you develop them, what impact they can have on your plot, and what role they play in fantasy worlds. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds. My name is Marie Mullaney. Next week, I want to talk about crafts guilds and what impact they have in fantasy worlds. So if this kind of content interests you, please do hit the subscribe button. And if you want to support me in making these videos, keep watching till the end and I will tell you how you can support me and how you can engage with me to help you build a better world. Okay, let's get cracking. Merchant guilds like the Hanseatic League arose at first to allow merchants to trade between towns located some distance apart. These days, goods flow across our planet so rapidly we rarely consider the risk of that flow stopping and the effect that would have on manufacturers and distributors. But back in the Middle Ages, it was a risky proposition to trade. There were wild animals that could attack your wagons, bandits and pirates that could steal your goods, storms that would wreck your whole day. Banding together into guilds allowed the merchants to pool their resources, hiring more guards, putting together bigger trade caravans to produce more profit, and generally reducing the risk of trading. Once you've done a few ventures together with someone else, it starts becoming easier to have a formalized agreement of when caravans will leave, what routes they will take, and so on. From there, it's an easy step to make a guild that controls trade in a given region. Humans being humans, it doesn't stop there, of course. Once you have your merchants guild up and running, it doesn't take long to force out the independent traders. It becomes a joy and me, or all those bad things that can happen on the road, well, they're all going to happen to your caravans. And once total control of trade in a region is established, it becomes even easier to start expanding. For the Hanseatic League, most Northern European cities wanted them to expand their trade network to their cities. The League actually forced many of those cities to offer League merchants a zero tax rate if they wanted the League to add a city as a point to the trade network. King Valdemar of Denmark saw the level of control that the League exercised and he wanted to keep them out of Scandinavia. But the League by then had what amounted to a private army of mercenaries and guards, and they forced open Scandinavia's borders. This was at the height of their power, and their slow decline started in the 15th century. The reason is again human nature. People get greedy, the membership fee of the League was too much, the routes too rigid, and some clever merchants came up with a concept of companies. Shared risk, shared reward. And so the merchant guilds like the Hanseatic League gradually declined and were replaced with a construct of companies. So much for a real-world example of a merchant guild. You know, if you follow this channel, that I love my historical roots. If you love your historical roots too, please do give this video a thumbs up. But this channel is about fantasy world building, so let's turn our attention now to a fantasy example and how you can use merchant guilds in fantasy, both with overt military power and with more subtle influence-based power. First, a spoiler warning for A Time of Exile by Catherine Kerr. I am going to spoil some of the plot elements by discussing the Merchant Guild. In A Time of Exile, Catherine Kerr does two very interesting things. The first is that the Guilbert of Aberwain seeks to finance his rebellion against the king in Dundevery with a loan from the Merchant Guild to the value of 2,000 silver coins. This is one of the main powers of the guilds before you have banking systems. Because they pool the resources of many rich merchants, they can therefore extend loans far beyond what a single merchant can extend. These loans can finance a war or, in the case of a time of exile, a rebellion. But why would the guilds finance such an activity? In the case of the Merchant Guild of Eldith, there are two reasons. The first is if the rebellion succeeds, they will gain freedom from the guilds of deverry and their taxes. So basically, they would gain more economic freedom and less taxation. The second reason that they would finance this loan is because of a sense of patriotism and pride towards Eldith. This kind of subtle exercise of power can lead to incredible interplay of politics, and Catherine Kerr uses it very well in a time of exile to emphasize the complexity and cost of going to war. It's not enough to have a casus belli and men with swords. The money for the war bill has to come from somewhere, and getting it from a merchant guild in the form of a loan allows you to show your ruler's interaction with commerce and have conflict and tension in the guild itself while they decide if they want to extend the loan. What's really great about the way that we are shown the guild in a time of exile is that we get to see inside the guild how they decide if they will grant this loan. The second interesting thing about the merchant guilds shown to us in a time of exile is that we see that the guild has reached a point where they are actually stifling creativity. It takes a young merchant leaving the guild to establish a new trade route and new trade goods because the guild has reached the point of stagnation in its development. This kind of stagnation is more prominent in crafts guilds than trade guilds, so I will speak more about it next week. But I found it interesting that the tension arising from someone desiring innovation versus the guild's inertia and investment in their current trade routes can be applied even to trade guilds and can provide a great point of conflict and plot tension. So in summary, how do we use merchant guilds? First, decide whether you want your merchant guild to be the main focus of your storyline or whether you want them to be more of an influencer in the background. I will, when I discuss Crafts Guild, go into more detail of defining the hierarchy of a guild. Once you know the role your guild is going to play in the story, whether as a main part of the story or an influencer, you need to decide where your guild is in its development path. If the guild is in its beginning phases, where it's just starting out organizing merchant caravans and starting to establish routes, it makes a very good protagonist organization. This is a motivation that makes sense to us as people. You need to move goods from point A to point B, and you want to establish safety in that route. It also makes for a great story because you can have conflict. You can have bears attacking them. You can have people attacking them. You can have them negotiating with various city mayors. So it makes a great storyline to have the establishment of a guild as a protagonist. The guild rising is where it starts forcing its competitors out of business. It starts strong-arming governments into giving it better taxation records. In this stage of development, it makes for a better antagonistic organization because you can have your protagonists oppose the guild and then have the guild be the evil organization that's trying to force the little man out of business, which is a story we can all generally get behind as humans. The guild ascended is where it is in that phase where it can go to war with governments. If the guild doesn't want you to go to war, they can decline your loan, and then you just don't have the money to go to war with. And then finally, there's the guild in decline, where you can have the guild slowly falling apart. And this makes for a great storyline where you want to focus on the guild, because your protagonist can be a member of the guild who's trying to establish reforms. and hence has to almost destroy the guild in order to reform the guild for it to survive. And that's my take on creating merchant guilds in a fantasy world. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If you have, please do hit the thumbs up button. If you want to support me in making more of these videos, I do have a page over on Ko-fi.com where you can buy me a cup of coffee for €1, or you can buy a membership for a monthly recurring fee, which will give you all kinds of cool benefits that you can check out on Ko-fi.com. If you would like my help to build out your world, you can engage with me via Ko-fi.com for €15. We can spend an hour together discussing world building concept specific to your world. And finally, I am in the middle of writing an epic fantasy book series, The Sangwheel Chronicles, and you can buy the first book, The Hidden Blade, in the link below. It is currently on pre-order at Amazon. It's been great fun making this episode, and I hope to see you soon for another one.